Proposition 6.
Good evening. I'm going to start by providing some very brief background, which is that the California Constitution bans involuntary servitude except as punishment for a crime. In addition, people in prison and jail can be required to work or do other activities like attend school. People who work in prison or jail are often paid, often less than $1 an hour. They can also sometimes earn credit off their prison or jail sentence in exchange for working. And people who refuse to work or do other activities that they're assigned, like taking classes, can face consequences like losing the ability to make regular phone calls, for example. Moving on to what Proposition 6 would do, it would remove that exception language from the Constitution, or the state constitution. In other words, it would ban involuntary servitude in all cases, including as punishment for a crime. It also bans prisons from disciplining people who refuse to work. However, Prop 6 states that it does not stop prisons from giving people credit, i.e. time off their sentence, in exchange for voluntarily accepting a work assignment. In terms of the fiscal effects, we found that they're uncertain because they would depend on how the rules around work for people in prison and jail are changed in response to the measure, as well as how people respond to those new rules. So, for example, if people in prison and jail can no longer face consequences for refusing to work, prisons and jails might have to find other ways to encourage people to work. So, for example, they might choose to pay people more, which would increase costs. On the other hand, they might choose to offer additional credits in exchange for working, which would reduce the amount of time people spend in prison or jail and therefore reduce costs. So we found that any potential increase or decrease in state and local criminal justice costs would likely not exceed the tens of millions of dollars each year.
Thank you. This got there through the state legislature. In support, we have the ACLU, the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, the Democratic Party, the California Teachers Association, the California Black Legislative Caucus. So this was part of the reparations discussions that were going on in the legislature, the California Labor Federation, League of Women Voters, and the Council on American and Islamic Relations. And then in opposition, Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association and the California Republican Party. In support, the SAC-B, the LA Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, and in opposition, San Diego Union Tribune, East Bay Times, and Pasadena Star News. And then the funding, we have various organizations that are education organizations, anti-recidivism, individuals who have donated money, California African American PAC, United Domestic Workers for American Action Fund, Teachers Association, so various donors there, and no funding in opposition to this. So 1.2 million have been raised in favor and none against. What questions do you have about this one?
Just a curiosity question. Is there any data on how extensive this problem of involuntary servitude in the prisons is? Do you have any data on that you can cite? That's my question.
The Constitution doesn't define involuntary servitude, so it's not entirely clear what exact current practices are authorized or currently existing under that term being in the Constitution. So for that reason, I don't think we could really define exactly what a specific problem exactly. But if you want to ask follow-up questions, I might be able to drill down a little bit more.
So are prisoners currently engaged in work which they did not volunteer for?
So state law requires the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, which operates the prisons, to require every able-bodied person to work as prescribed by their regulations. So CDCR regulations essentially say that everyone is obligated to work as assigned by the department staff, and assignments may be up to a full day of work or other programs, including rehabilitative programs. So essentially, the regulations say, unless you have some kind of medical or other reason why you can't work, you're pretty much supposed to be engaged in something, whether that's what we think of as work in the more traditional sense, or school, or some kind of treatment program, or a combination. So that is kind of the current status, and people can be required to engage in those activities, and if they refuse, then there can be disciplinary consequences. But there are also incentives for people to work as well, like pay, for example, right now. So there's kind of a carrot and stick system, if you will, right now, that encourages people to engage in some kind of activity while they're incarcerated. There is a companion bill that was passed that was signed by the governor and would go into effect if the proposition passes, that directs CDCR to develop a voluntary work program and prescribe the rules and regulations regarding work and programming assignments for individuals incarcerated. So basically it's telling CDCR to rewrite their regulations around work and assignment to other types of activities that people do during the day in addition to work, like school. So, and then the Constitution, if Prop 6 passed, would prohibit prisons from disciplining people who refuse to work. So then it kind of becomes a question of how CDCR interprets that in writing their revised regulations. I hope that helps.
Yeah, another question?
I see it supported by sort of the Anti-Recidivism Association, or is this anticipated to have any effect on recidivism?
That wasn't part of our analysis, so I don't have an answer for you, yeah. I mean, I suppose to the extent it results in more people ending up participating in evidence-based programs that reduce recidivism while they're in prison, such as substance use disorder treatment, for example, or getting job training, for example, which people can do through work programs. Then it could have an impact on recidivism. To the extent it does the opposite of that, results in less people participating in those programs that address whatever their criminogenic needs are, then it could potentially, result in more recidivism. So it kind of depends on how it's implemented, I would say.
And one more question.
I think that this idea of, what PIL, prison inmate labor, is
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I think that the notion of what PIL is kind of an interesting concept that was brought up earlier. And I was wondering, does CDCR provide information on how much prison inmate labor is actually part of their system, percentage-wise? Are we talking half the prisoners, 90% of the prisoners, 10%?
I think it's roughly a third of folks have a job. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. And is there any research that shows that those folks are, actually doing it to pass the time, actually make a few bucks, actually enjoy the work? Does anybody have any research on that?
Research on why people are participating in work programs inside prison?
Yes.
I don't know about research about why individuals choose to participate. It's possible that research exists. I'm not familiar with it. From speaking to people and talking to the department in the course of analyzing this, it does seem like there's a variety of reasons people might choose to work, in addition to the fact that they can be required to if that's what they're assigned to. But people, can earn money which they can spend on goods in the canteen. They also, in some cases, can earn time off their prison sentence. They can get a skill. There's maybe they enjoy being engaged in doing something during the day. So I think there could be a variety of different reasons. Does that, but I can't speak to, if there's been research on that specifically.
Okay, yeah, thank you. It just kind of surprises me that even with this carrot and stick process that there aren't more people that engage. It's surprising.